Nothing personal, kid.
Baby, don't you know it? I'm hardly heroic. Baby, let's roll it, 'cause I'm hardly heroic.
In the world of Warhammer Fantasy, great weapons, sometimes referred to as two-handed or double-handed weapons, are a class of weapon that are extremely destructive. Your standard fare, like hand axes or swords, don't confer any sort of bonus when you're attacking. We call those hand weapons. A weapon like a cavalry lance gives you +2 strength, but only on the charge. A great weapon, and really this is what makes them great, gives you +2 strength all the time, which is extremely handy. Not only does it mean you'll wound your enemy more easily, but you'll also negate 2 points of their armor save. For some models, that's their entire armor save. Now you might be wondering why more units don't just bust out the great weapons more often. Well, there are a couple of downsides to this weapon. The main one, of course, is that great weapons impose a heavy penalty on your initiative, and this most often manifests as you striking last in combat. Since initiative determines when you fight in Warhammer Fantasy, it often means that you'll be striking after your opponent, meaning that your great weapon might come to naught because the wielder dies before they can even swing it. There is, of course, one exception: the Swordmasters of Hoth, and the subject of today's video. Let me start by saying that I've been playing Warhammer Renaissance, and I feel the siren song of starting a retro high-elf army. I'll try to resist, but in truth, the Swordmasters have been one of my top 10 units ever since I started playing Warhammer. The Swordmasters of Hoth are sword sages. They are a specific warrior scholar order who serve as guardians of the Tower of Hoth in the magical realm of Safari, in the high-elf homeland of Ulthuan. The Tower of Hoth is interesting. It's probably a subject for another video, but in summary, it's the greatest arcane library in the world, and Swordmasters are a combination of scholars and warriors, and they're the ones who guard its halls with their iconic 5 to 6 feet long greatswords. How they fit those between the stacks of bookshelves, that's perhaps a question for another time. These weapons, forged by special elven smiths, are extremely light and never lose their edge. These Swordmasters, of course, are academics, and so they take the academic approach to warfare. They're not soldiers. Instead, they hone their skills through meditation, study of the blade, and practice. I think all of these... Warhammer Fantasy is full of lots of different kinds of great warriors. You've got everything from immortal vampire knights to supernaturally powered warriors of chaos. But of all the great warriors in Warhammer, I think that Swordmasters are the ones that truly deserve the title. Why? Well, remember the great weapons I talked about earlier? Since the inception of Swordmasters in Warhammer 4th edition, Swordmasters have been armed with great weapons. But they've also been given a rule that negates the initiative penalty of great weapons. So this means that these elves are always striking at strength 5, and they're always attacking in initiative order, which, given that they're elves, is usually higher than most races. So you get that +2 strength, and you can usually strike first. The only thing that really stops this unit from being ludicrously powerful is, of course, the elf who wields the sword is still strength 3 and toughness 3, and has 1 attack. They're very capable warriors, but they're still going to struggle if they get hit or they enter fights that they don't win immediately with their first round of attacks. In 4th edition, the Swordmasters wore light armor, which I think is frankly ridiculous given what the official artwork shows them wearing. I mean, all that scale armor and still only a 6+ crave? That's insane. But from 5th edition, thankfully, they were given heavy armor. Interestingly enough, they were also given a rule about deflecting arrows with their swords. In the lore, the Swordmasters are depicted as being superhumanly agile, so it really doesn't seem implausible that they might be able to deflect an arrow. In game terms, it just means that shooting attacks to the front are at -1 to hit. They're still fragile though. Remember, these are still elves. Future editions would give up on the arrow deflection special rule, but remember, they've always kept the initiative buff. So, the Swordmasters of Hoth are, I think, my favorite of the Elven Heavy Infantry. There are really 3 options when you're looking at the elite Elven Foot Infantry. You've got, of course, the Swordmasters of Hoth, you have the Phoenix Guard, and you have the White Lions. I admit that the Phoenix Guard and the White Lions are pretty cool. I certainly think that the Phoenix Guard are maybe cooler than the White Lions, but that's a personal preference. But the Swordmasters, in my mind, have always stood out as the premier of the Elven Heavy Infantry, alright? You can generally count on them to blend whatever you fight in melee, but you can also count on your enemy to not let that happen. Shooting attacks, magic, or just plain old cheap chaff hordes are their bane, since that's one fewer greatsword cutting down a Chaos Warrior or a Black Orc with their lightning quick blades. I think that the Swordmasters of Hoth are a very interesting unit. When you look at the history of the High Elves, you're generally looking at an army that is inspired by classical antiquity. For the most part, that means things like chariots and spearmen and archers. The Swordmasters, however, I think really elevate the High Elf concept by adding to this classical antiquity with massive swords wielded by almost supernaturally quick warriors. There is something special, I think, about the fusion of magic and melee that can only really be represented by the High Elves in Warhammer Fantasy. And I think that the Swordmasters are the perfect fusion of that. They are sword sages. They do practice martial arts from a more academic perspective. They are, in fact, very heavily associated with magic and sorcerers and so on and so forth. The other thing I think that we should also bear in mind is that the Swordmasters of Hoth have something of a reputation that can maybe be sinister depending on what you're thinking of. You know, they were kind of used as a secret police, but then again they were used to help root out the chaos cults that had infected Ulthuan. So it's one of those things where you have to look at them and go, well, these guys are really cool and they're obviously one of the best soldiers that you've got in the High Elf army. But on the other hand, you know, maybe there are some things that are about them that are a little bit sinister. You know, maybe you shouldn't be using these people as a sort of secret police. You know, maybe there are secrets that the High Elves are hiding that you maybe could hide with a monastic order like the Swordmasters, principally dedicated to the mages of Sapphire, right? It's one of those things that I think is really interesting, and it helps make the unit more rounded out. Because they're not really paladins, they're Swordmasters, and that's an important difference. So, thank you for watching this very brief history of. As you can tell, units with two-handed swords are my favorite in this franchise. Let me know what some of your favorite elven units are, and remember to like this video, subscribe, share, etc., etc. Until next time, take care.